So everybody seems to be able to acknowledge now that we have a problem, and yet nobody wants to do anything about it. In today's video, I am going to be continuing my excavation of the public record, bringing you what I have uncovered concerning the Catholic organization Opus Dei and its alleged use of psychiatric medicine to annul and control the lives and wills of its members. This is building on a pre-existing video I uploaded a couple of weeks back where I introduced the precedent for bringing this up again and introduce some of the preliminary research that I found. So if you haven't seen that, you can go and find it over on my content, and make sure that you are subscribed if you haven't already, because I will have a third and final part of this sort of little mini series on this issue within Opus Dei coming out hopefully within the next week. Everything that we're going to be discussing in today's video can be found in a source document down below. It's all publicly available. Please make free use of that, access it at your leisure, and use it as a starting point to do your own research. I want to issue a content warning before we get into the particulars, because it's simply inevitable we are going to be discussing issues that some viewers may find disturbing or upsetting, so viewer discretion is advised. Please keep your own mental health forefront at all times. Before I get into the particulars, I have a quick announcement that I want to make that I am very, very excited about sharing with everyone, and I hope that you'll give me a few minutes of your time, even though I am digressing from the video topic a bit. So I am excited to tell you that I have become involved in a UK-based social impact brand focused on addressing women's safety at the root called HASSL, HASSL. This is a brand that was founded in 2024 by a female Gen Z entrepreneur named Amy Watson, and HASSL has adopted a comprehensive multi-solution approach designed to create societal change by focusing on issues such as systemic sexism, misogyny, poor public space design, barriers to reporting, and lack of awareness and education. What I really love about HASSL's mission and why I'm so excited to be involved is that instead of simply promoting safety products or self-defense tools, which do have their place, but are often criticized for placing more of the mental and financial load on women to keep ourselves safe, HASSL is combining tools and training and tech to shift the responsibility of public safety from women, which I think is much needed and very cool. Since its launch in 2024, HASSL has grown a global and diverse community of nearly 500,000 members from more than 100 different countries who all resonate with HASSL's call to action, "It stops with us." This encourages collective responsibility while reshaping the narrative around women's safety. I have been following HASSL and Amy Watson over on Instagram nearly since the launch of the brand, and when they opened up spots for brand ambassadorships, I immediately applied. I wanted to get involved because HASSL's entire mission really resonates with me and with everything that I stand for, which I'm sure is very obvious to any of my longtime subscribers. I firmly believe that individual and collective action are the keys to transforming society and the world, and I am constantly encouraging everyone here to ask questions, get curious, and become more informed. Because why? Because as I am always saying, ignorance is a luxury that we and billions of innocent people simply can no longer afford. And I am a believer in how liberating and empowering education can be, so I am excited to begin promoting HASSL's growing suite of completely free online educational resources that you and literally anyone that you know can access and take advantage of. And I will pull up their resource and education page here so that you can see what it looks like, and I also will have this linked down in the description below. One thing that really makes these resources stand out to me is the emphasis that they place on educating and empowering men specifically to be a part of the solution. While these are conversations and resources that everyone needs to engage with, as the tragically revealing adage states, a man's greatest fear is that a woman will laugh at him, while a woman's greatest fear is that the man will kill her. And yes, I know not all men, which is is arguably the entire point. The entire responsibility for women's safety cannot rest on us women alone. And I know that there are so many good men who want to be a part of the solution. I'm married to one. There are already a good number of men involved with HASSL, and it has been really, really good to see examples of men who are being proactive in tackling violence against women at the root. HASSL's educational resources provide a fantastic starting point for anyone who wants to become informed and include really important topics such as bystander intervention, the cause and consequence of patriarchy, which hurts us all, including men, how to open up conversations about harassment, consent, and so much more. I have already enrolled in and begun a few courses myself, and it has been reinforcing and reminding me so much of the important facets of the topic around women's health and safety. And I'm still learning about how HASSL tackles its various initiatives, and there are so many ways to get involved in new ways every week. So I am looking forward to incorporating some of their resources into my work on the Deep Dive project, because I definitely see some overlap in the work that we are doing. If any of this sounds interesting to you, I'll have some good links down below where you can learn more, follow HASSL, and maybe check out a free course for yourself. So with that announcement out of the way, and again, I cannot express enough how excited I am about this. I think that this has the potential to be transformative. Let's go ahead and get into the first article that I'll be reading, and I'm going to be quoting from myself. This is an article that I published on my Substack, Beck Griffin in the Deep Dive Project, a little over a year ago now. July 30th, 2025 was when I published this. I wrote a small series of articles directly dealing with this issue of APM, the abuse of psychiatric medicine, in Opus Dei. And you can go and find all of those articles over on my Substack and read them. They're all paywall free, as is everything that I publish on my Substack. I just feel like we need to be making information as available as possible to people right now. And I want to read this one article from my series because I think it includes some really relevant information and will get us on the right track for the rest of this video. So I titled this article, "The Fear Generator, Opus Dei and Psychiatric Medicine, Part 3. The subheading says, any vocational doubt was addressed by the institution as a psychological or psychiatric problem with the consequent supply of psychotropic drugs to neutralize the will. So all of this, my foray into one of the deepest rabbit holes that I've ever stumbled upon, the ramifications of what I have learned, shattering my faith in every man-made institution on earth as I've gone along, and that is not hyperbole. It all began with a story. On a random day in a random week in early 2020, I stumbled upon an individual sharing a story and rumors about an organization that I recognized in name only from my youth. It was a story about a family that had been more or less completely immobilized by its contact with Opus Dei in the adult life of one of its children, now grown and struggling to come to terms with the memories of their childhood. In the way that survivors so often do, this person came seeking corroboration of their experiences by shouting into the virtual void. An unsuspecting bystander that I was, I found myself emotionally impacted by these stories this individual and the others who materialized in the comments section shared. All the more so when I discovered that no one was really covering the situation in any substantial way. A dozen voices crying out in the wilderness, and how could I turn away? Since then, quite a lot has changed, and the voices have multiplied, but the compulsion that I feel to amplify these stories and to uplift in some small way the lives of the people telling them has remained unchanged. So it really cannot be any wonder that my journey has led me here, to the heart of a very nasty matter of human rights. As I have gone along, pulling each story and experience out like threads from the depths of the internet, unknowingly or not, I have been following a path with a destination that I believe was an inevitability from the beginning. In a narrative strewn with allegations of grooming, coercion, spiritual, religious, emotional, physical, sexual, and financial abuse, shattered dreams, and lost potential, how far do we think we can go before the manipulation of free will and free thought, often through the alleged use of psychiatric medicine, becomes an unavoidable elephant in the room? For me, I can go no further. These stories represent roadblocks that I do not believe should be cleared casually and callously, particularly when those who lived through it all are left with little or no acknowledgement of their experiences. A 2024 article from the Irish Independent, "I Came Out Suicidal, the woman speaking out about leaving Opus Dei," underscores all of this. Former member and outspoken whistleblower Eileen Johnson shared insights into her experience with the organization, specifically in regard to the use of psychiatric medicine against the members, and her words are sobering. Eileen was a member of Opus Dei for 11 years. She was groomed by her French teacher and whistled when she was 16 years old. Eileen has pushed back repeatedly on the idea that Opus Dei does not exert undue control or influence over other people's lives. She wrote, "It has been said by defendants of Opus Dei that those who join do so willingly and have no right to criticize the organization after they leave. Such a judgment overlooks the fact that people, especially young, impressionable people, do not join cults. They are recruited, often after being groomed. That process can erode their ability to make informed decisions of their own or use their own free will. The targeted individuals, usually teenagers, are normally intelligent and gifted and good leaders. They are made to feel cared for and special. They develop a great sense of belonging to a spiritual family that claims to be destined to transform society by winning people over to the teachings of its founder, Jose Maria Escrivá." During 3 of those 11 years, Eileen worked as an assistant directress at a student center. Due to her position, she was able to access information and documentation that the average member of Opus Dei or the public do not see. This included the fact that Opus Dei chose to respond to its members' struggles by instructing them to go to an Opus Dei psychiatrist, fomenting active distrust of the individual's experiences through gaslighting and shifting the blame from the institution onto the individual. Not only did Eileen witness this happen to others, but it happened to her as well, to such a degree that she questioned her own lived reality and grasp on sanity. She wrote, "When I read the founder Jose Maria Escriva's words, saying anyone who left should be considered dead, and that he would not give 5 centimes for their soul, that was when my breakdown started. I came out suicidal. At one point, I took an overdose. I am lucky to be alive. It was very difficult to put my life together. I was deeply traumatized, and it was unethical for Opus Dei doctors and psychiatrists to be treating me with no access to medical people outside of the organization. Personally, I have suffered deep spiritual abuse as a result of my membership of Opus Dei. And it was not confined only to the assistant numeraries. We women numeraries went through hell as well." In an article titled "Dead or Alive, an Opus Dei Survivor Speaks," published on Opus Libris, Eileen discusses how even 50 years on from her experiences, she still struggles to put those experiences into words, partly out of a desire not to cause harm or distress to the good people that she knew while she was on the inside, but she feels it is her duty to speak up and share the truth. She says, "Life in the work suits many, but many others, having been recruited too early in their lives, have suffered to varying degrees over time as a result. This was true in my case and in that of too many others. The outcome was deeply damaging for me." Her personal experiences with those representing authority in Opus Dei were, to be quite frank, harrowing and disturbing. She wrote, "At 16, I was a bright and happy student, an all-rounder who loved singing, dancing, and life in general. I wanted to become a language teacher, and it seemed I was poised to move on to a successful adulthood. I had met my first love. This was one of the happiest times of my life, but I was unaware that I was being watched by an Opus Dei numerary, one of my school teachers, who proceeded to groom me through her friendship. I had never heard of Opus Dei and did not know that she was a member. After I left Opus Dei 12 years later, I was a shadow of my former self. I became suicidal, and my doctor said that the only cases he had seen of this level of distress were former prisoners of war. Why? Well, for one thing, I had been on medication prescribed by Opus Dei numeraries, doctors, and psychiatrists for 4 years before I was able to leave. I was one of many treated in such a way. This was unethical. Had I been able to consult an objective doctor, I may have left 4 years sooner than I did. Independent diagnosis after I left concluded that my problems arose due to the regime I had been subjected to and the cocktail of drugs prescribed. Our GP, Hyacinth Hickey, who on her arrival in the UK from Ireland in the 60s was put in charge of the health of all of us numeraries and assistant numeraries, had prescribed a variety of drugs to several of us. In my case, she tried me on Librium, Tofranil, Mogadon, and lithium before settling on Valium. When I was sent to Pamplona for a year to study journalism at Opus Dei's University of Navarre, the treatment was handed over to my spiritual directress, a Spanish woman doctor who continued to prescribe Valium to me and medication to another English numerary who accompanied me. I had heard of numbers of former assistant numeraries and numeraries who were dragged in-house by fellow members were drugged in-house by fellow members of Opus Dei in the UK, Spain, North and South America. Many, like myself, were referred to Opus Dei psychiatrists. This was totally unethical, involving clear conflicts of interests. It happened to Tina Fogarty, a former Irish assistant numerary, also at the hands of Hyacinth Hickey in the UK. Tina was put on amitriptyline over a period of 7 years. Physical symptoms requiring specialist advice were overlooked, and she was not examined physically. Rather, she was told by Hickey that her physical pain was related to her depression. Quote, when I was eventually able to consult a doctor on the outside world after leaving Opus Dei, he said that the only comparable case in his experience was that of a former prisoner of war. I have heard similar reports from other former members, particularly those who spent many years in Opus Dei and or were of a sensitive disposition. A major criticism of Opus Dei, in my experience, is that we were recruited with scant regard for our individuality or for our well-being or personal development. We were, quite simply, used. The recruitment and treatment of the assistant numeraries was a particularly obvious and stark example of this. Yet the systemic exploitation, coercion, and brainwashing of numeraries, especially in the women's section, was also appalling. For me, the worst thing was the use of friendship as a tool for proselytism. As someone who values friendship greatly, to be without friends over many years was a form of social starvation, so that when I left, I felt dangerously alone in the world. My doctor, very concerned about the degree of my isolation as I approached my 30th birthday, suggested that I contact Opus Dei to see if one or other of my former sisters might come to see me. My mother phoned and spoke to a numerary who had formerly been a close friend of her and our family. She agreed to come and arrived the following day for a brief visit. The next day, she phoned to say she had been instructed not to contact me again. She said she was phoning from a coin box in the street to avoid being overheard. That lady was genuinely fond of me, of my mother and my family, particularly my young nephews. She was the same age as me, had joined Opus Dei at the age of 14, and was popping Valium with alarming frequency. Soon after this, I took an overdose. I remember facing the probability of death, but the prospect of going on existing in such despair, isolation, and rejection was too bleak. After I came round in my hospital, my doctor took me off the Valium I had become dependent on. A week later, he commented, now I see the real Eileen, your eyes have come alive. Opus Dei generates a great amount of fear. It is said that fear is mentioned more often in the Bible than in any other word. Fear is a limiting and negative human emotion. According to human scripture, perfect love casts out fear. There should be no problem about speaking out about one's suffering, about one's opinion, offering constructive criticism. In fact, such criticism is a responsible, helpful attitude, though difficult to express and often not well accepted. In Opus Dei, to criticize the perfect work of God was deemed to be down to pride. The day I left, I spoke to the prelate of Opus Dei in Britain in the confessional. I told him that I thought my depressive illness had been wrongly handled by members of Opus Dei prescribing me drugs and Opus Dei psychiatrists becoming involved and my spiritual directors going along with the process. Again, he said I was proud to criticize the work. With hindsight, I see that I was right. In fact, I knew at the time that I was right, though I was too broken to state my case. It took me some 20 years to be able to speak out. First, I needed to recover and live as normal a life as possible. There is something wrong when so many individuals need to remain anonymous and are afraid to speak out. Not that I am saying that wounded former members should speak out. The big priority is recovery and to make available whatever caring support each one may need. However, Opus Dei generates a great deal of fear. The prelature should be obliged to acknowledge serious damage done to many people, so often as the result of irresponsible proselytism that fails to consider the good of the individual. Their tactics are systematic, described by Jose Maria Escriva in The Way and in many internal documents and in his various talks to members. The overwhelming feeling that I am nearly always left with after reading accounts like Eileen's, which we are going to read more of in this video, is that none of what I read is necessarily novel or unique. My sense tells me that where there are one or two, there are likely others. In the same way that a criminal caught in the act is not captured the very first time the opportunity that they have to offend, but rather after many successful crimes have resulted in complacency, I do not believe that these systems of control and suppression in Opus Dei only occurred for a brief period of time in Ireland and the UK during the 20th century. I am simply unable to suspend my disbelief to that extent. And that is my opinion. And you are free to disagree with me. So the second article that I'm going to read was published back in May. This is another article discussing investigative journalist Gareth Gore's meeting with Pope Leo to discuss Opus Dei. This is an article that was published in Spanish. I'm going to translate it using an extension on my browser. This webpage, it like pops back in and out of the Spanish from time to time, so I'm going to have to like reset it. So if there are pauses while I am reading where it's quiet, that's probably what is going on. But I wanted to share this article because it orients us to just kind of the situation overall with this organization, and then once again reinforces the element of this APM within Opus Dei. So the headline of this article says, Gareth Gore, author of Opus, quote, "The Pope promised me he would examine all of the evidence regarding abuse at a hospital in northern Spain." SER speaks with the writer after he denounced to Leo the abuses of power and psychological abuses committed by the prelature for years in Spain and other countries. With just a month to go before the Pope's visit to Spain, since this was published, obviously the Pope has been to Spain and left, but prior, when this was published, the visit to Spain was still coming up. SER has been able to speak with Gareth Gore ahead of the Pope's visit. Journalist and writer, author of Opus, a work where he recounts the abuses committed by Opus Dei in Spain and other countries for years, and where he provides evidence of the enormous influence of Opus Dei in the Catholic Church. In 2022, Pope Francis ordered the prelature to revisit its statutes, but years later, the project, which aims to guarantee greater transparency within the organization, remains under review. Gareth Gore has asked Leo to initiate an investigation into the numerous controversies he highlights in his book before approving the reform. So these are responses to SER's questions in Gareth Gore's own words. They ask, how does Opus Dei work? And he said, I believe the best way to understand Opus Dei is as a network of power and influence operated in almost every country in the world. I would absolutely agree with that assessment by Gareth, and I'm glad that we are on the same page. The organization presents itself as a simple group of devout Catholics who want to help other Catholics deepen their faith, but that's just a facade for what it really is. As you know, from its very beginning, Opus Dei's primary interests have been accumulating power, wealth, and influence. SER is a Spanish news site, and Opus Dei the influence of Opus Dei in Spanish society has been significantly more noticeable and commented on than it has been, like, say, here in the United States. So I have no doubt that SER knows very well about Opus Dei's influence. What are the main scandals surrounding the organization? He says, this organization has been embroiled in many scandals over the years, and I believe the main one is the spiritual and psychological abuse that occurs within Opus Dei. The organization recruits powerful and influential people by deceiving them into joining. It pretends to want to help them to be better Catholics, but in reality, it exploits people's faith to, in some way, get close to them. And it uses Catholic practices like confession and spiritual guidance sessions to control and manipulate its members. There is a tremendous amount of spiritual abuse within the organization. It uses these so-called spiritual guidance sessions to gather information about its members. Then it uses that information to manipulate, control, and pressure them into doing things that could benefit Opus Dei, either financially or in terms of influence. Furthermore, the psychological abuse it inflicts on its members is appalling. They ask, what does that psychological abuse look like? He said, In particular, numerary members are subjected to enormous control over every aspect of their lives. Many are under intense psychological pressure. Many of them, as you know, have broken down under this intense pressure. As you know, the ranks of Opus Dei are rife with cases of mental and psychological illness. What the organization has done over the years is try to cover it up. It sent these people to Opus Dei doctors who prescribed a cocktail of drugs to mask the symptoms of many of these victims without actually addressing the causes of this mental illness. There have been many cases of suicide and of people who simply couldn't cope with the situation and received no help from the organization. And of course, there is also the crucial issue of human trafficking and slavery, the way in which the organization, in addition to targeting the elites of society, has tried to create a source of free labor for itself. This initially began in Spain, but in recent years, it has spread to less developed countries. What does this slavery consist of? It primarily targeted young women from impoverished areas of the world, luring them into joining Opus Dei under false promises. Once inside, they were essentially exploited as free labor and trafficked around the globe. There is currently a criminal case underway in the courts of Argentina where more than 40 women have filed complaints and made very serious accusations. Prosecutors in that country investigated the case for 2 years and concluded that the crimes were committed and that Opus Dei must be held accountable. But this practice was not limited to Argentina. What happened in Argentina was happening in other parts of the world. Many more women have come forward in places like Ireland, Mexico, and other parts of the world, and I believe there are thousands upon thousands of similar victims. They ask, is there any figure on the number of victims of Opus Dei? He said a very conservative estimate would put it in the thousands. So think about that. While this is an organization that is small, claiming to have something like 90,000 members worldwide, a figure which is hotly contested and believed to be significantly smaller by people who've actually been involved with the organization, despite the fact that it is so small. A conservative estimate, according to Gareth Gore, would put the figure of the number of victims of Opus Dei in the thousands. And he says that there are different types of victims. For example, the young women who were enslaved and then trafficked around the world, those cases alone would number in the thousands. We already know that there are at least 40 confirmed cases in Argentina, and that's only counting the people who have joined this lawsuit. There are many more worldwide, to say nothing, by the way, of the lawsuits that never see the light of day, because this organization has been very, very talented at escaping any sort of like legal culpability for any of the untoward things that it has been accused of participating and permitting to occur. If we broaden the concept of abuse to include psychological and spiritual abuse, I would say that most members of Opus Dei have been affected at some point. I'm referring to the way the organization has abused Catholic practices like confession to obtain information about its members and manipulate them into doing what they want. In my opinion, that does constitute abuse. I would say that tens of thousands of members could have been affected by this abuse. Why do you think the church isn't doing anything about it? He says, I think Opus Dei is very powerful and influential in the church. It has been a source of funding for the church, especially in Spain. For many years, it has been more convenient for the church to turn a blind eye to these abuses. The church has known about this for many, many years and has chosen to do nothing. There have been some minor changes, starting with Pope Benedict, but they didn't go very far and in reality didn't have much impact. Pope Francis was the first to address this problem. Basically, in 2022, he issued a papal decree ordering Opus Dei to get its house in order and reform itself. They delayed, and in a way, they managed to get away with it quite successfully. They knew that Pope Francis was older. They knew that if they delayed, there was a possibility that he would die before being able to implement real reform. But what they didn't expect was someone like Pope Leo. And I think Pope Leo has shown himself to be truly willing to confront this problem. The fact that he invited me, the author of a book highly critical of the organization, and received me publicly at the Vatican, I think sends a very clear signal that he takes this problem very seriously. So I believe that after so many years of little action, we should expect significant measures from the Vatican at some point. What did Gareth Gore tell the Pope in the meeting, and what was Leo's reply? Gareth says, I presented him with detailed evidence of decades of abuse within Opus Dei. I offered to put him in touch with people willing to testify about many aspects of this abuse and how Opus Dei has operated in secret over the years. I also urged him to launch an independent investigation into Opus Dei. If you have a problem, to find a solution, you must first understand exactly what it is. And I believe the church does not fully understand how Opus Dei operates, nor does it understand the magnitude of the problem it faces. That's why I urged him to launch an investigation. I also urged him to reopen the canonization of Jose Maria Escriva, the founder of Opus Dei, because I believe, and this is supported by the documents that I gave to the Pope, that Escriva is at the root of many of the organization's evils. This is an organization that believes the rules it follows, this kind of system of abuse it's promoting all over the world, are divinely inspired. So yes, I strongly urge the Pope to reopen the canonization of Escriva as part of broader reforms. I think it's excellent that Gareth is making these points, and shout out to him for continuing to go and have these conversations and do these interviews and meet with these people to get this information out there. He really does deserve his flowers for that, because he's just an investigative journalist. He's not a Catholic, and was never involved in Opus Dei either. So he really has no motivating dog in this fight other than a desire to see justice, I think. And that's exemplary. They ask, did the Pope simply listen, or did he promise to investigate and analyze the matter? Which is very important. And I want you to pay attention to this paragraph and to what Gareth Gore says. He listened very attentively. He asked many insightful questions. It became very clear to me that some of the things I told him weren't entirely new to him. He had worked for many years in Peru, where Opus Dei has a large following and considerable political influence, so I think he was quite familiar with some of the things I presented to him. But some were new. At times during our meeting, I saw him gasp. He was clearly shocked by some of the things I told him, including the testimonies I had heard about a psychiatric center in northern Spain, where many very ill members of Opus Dei were sent there, practically isolated and treated with a cocktail of medications far from their families. He promised me that he would reflect deeply on this. He would examine all of the evidence I had given him. So the question was, did the Pope simply listen, or did he promise to investigate and analyze the matter? And we got our answer, although it took a full paragraph. He promised that he would reflect deeply and that he would examine all of the evidence. Does that sound like a promise to investigate and analyze the matter or not? To me, it feels a little squishy. And it goes on, and I'll explain. I think it'll become clear why I say it feels squishy. Because they ask, in all of these weeks since your meeting, has the Holy See contacted you to request those contacts you offered the Pope of people abused by Opus Dei? And he says, so far, no. And then he goes on to say, but I mean, it's only been a month since the meeting, and, this is a 2,000-year-old institution that doesn't operate in the most streamlined way. I'm pretty sure something will happen. The fact that the Pope invited me and made it public makes me think so. It would have been very easy for the Pope to ask me to meet with one of his subordinates, with someone else, without generating the publicity that has resulted from the meeting. Instead, he decided to meet with me personally, and not only that, he could have asked me to keep the meeting secret, but it was he who invited cameras to film and photograph the first parts of the meeting. He clearly wanted to make it clear to Opus Dei that he was taking these accusations very seriously. And I think he also wanted to convey to the victims that he is listening to them. He wanted to send a message to the church in general that after a year of his pontificate, he is beginning to find his footing. And this is the kind of church he wants to build. He wants to build a church that takes abuse allegations seriously, unlike some of his predecessors. And, as you know, he wants to do things with transparency and openness. He wants to do things with transparency and openness. He's committed to addressing these wrongs. But the Vatican, the Holy See, as of the publication of this article, and we can presume still to this day, has not asked to speak with any of the people, the network of people that Gareth Gore now has access to, thanks to the years that he spent researching this very issue. They haven't asked for it. And far from promising to investigate and analyze anything, all that Pope Leo said, according to Gareth Gore in this article, is that he would reflect deeply and examine all of the evidence. That doesn't sound like launching an investigation to me. Does it sound like it to you? Also, and this is something that I continue to come up against, I have been critical of the Catholic Church's and the Vatican's response to its various abuse crises, and I have been critical of individual pontiffs as well, because in my opinion, at this point in time, the bar is in hell. Yes, this is an organization that, is old and doesn't operate in the most streamlined way. That may be true, but you also must remember that this is a 2,000-year-old organization with a 2,000-year-old paper trail of abuse, verifiable using the church's own documents. So I am a bit suspicious of this religious organization and of its leadership actually doing anything substantial, and I wish I didn't feel that way. I wish I didn't feel so distrusting and suspicious, because I know that there are so many current practicing Catholics and also members of this organization and other religious organizations like it who are watching what's happening with the Vatican and with Pope Leo and are waiting for him to do something, to actually do something, right? To not just show up to a meeting, to not just express feelings of remorse and sadness, to not simply say that he's going to reflect deeply on everything, to actually do something. Some people have been waiting their entire lives. A whole lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people died, are gone, and will never see the justice that they wanted and deserved for the things that happened to them at the hands of this religious organization. And you may be picking up on a little bit of anger in my tone and the subtext of what I am saying. And yes, I am very angry. I am angry on the behalf of the people who have been harmed, who still do not have access to justice, who are dealing with the plethora onset of problems that surviving the wide ranges of abuse that this organization has permitted to be inflicted upon people with little to no assistance. Yeah, you're damn right. I'm a little bit angry. Because I was raised being told a very specific narrative about this religious organization and the people who are in charge of it. And what I have learned now as an adult, unfortunately, is that, the Pope is basically a complete and total monarch. He's a king. He sits at the very top of a triangle-shaped hierarchical organization, and he answers to nobody except his God. And so if he wanted to do something significant and substantial, he could do it. And this is not just something that I am expressing. This is something that other advocates and victim survivors of clerical abuse within the Catholic Church who have talked to pontiffs and gone to the Vatican have talked about. If they wanted to actually do something substantial to get a hold on these issues, now they would have done it. I judge people by the fruits of their labor, not by the quotes that get regurgitated on social media and across different news sites. What do we have to show? Fuck all. Yeah, I'm a little bit upset. I'm pretty frustrated. And I am not upset with Gareth Gore for anything that he said here, for his perspective. He's being asked to weigh in on a very complex situation concerning a religious organization that he's never actually been a part of, right? He's only ever been reporting on it from the outside. So I have no problem with his perspective or his stance or the responses that he's giving to the press. He's doing his best. But he is, from the way that I am reading this, essentially fabricating intention in meeting from a person who really has not given him any indication that that is like actually substantial and sincere. He says that he clearly wanted to make it clear to Opus Dei that he was taking these accusations very seriously. Okay, well, 2 sentences ago, he also said that the Pope invited cameras to film and photograph the first parts of the meeting. This isn't some Luddite living in a cave. He has access to the internet, and he knows that the majority of the people who are in his religious organization do as well. And I don't understand why any pontiff apparently has been unable to simply sit down in front of a camera and with their full chest say the things that Gareth Gore is saying he believes the Pope feels. Why couldn't Pope Leo take one of these cameras ahead of this meeting and say in very clear language to the camera that he is taking the accusations against this organization, Opus Dei, very seriously? and that he wants to convey by meeting publicly with someone like Gareth Gore that he is listening. He is listening to the experiences that people are trying to alert him to. And oh, by the way, by having this meeting with this person and the other people that he has been talking to, he is intending to send a message to the church that he is now responsible for, that he's found his footing, and that this is the kind of church that he wants to build. Why can't those words come out of Pope Leo's mouth? Why must they be delivered through tertiary means, secondarily after the fact, through a news site or social media? I understand that I live in a country with a leader who has used social media in some pretty abhorrent ways. So I'm not saying that that's like a good example, but I think we can safely presume that Pope Leo has access to the same internet as the rest of us. And if he actually really wanted to, I think he could actually really say something that would actually soothe a lot of people's minds and give people a lot more confidence and an idea of what is going to happen going forward. But they don't do that, do they? They never do that. And I think that that is pretty interesting because I don't think it's accidental. And I've got a big problem with it because it does not feel sincere. So far, nothing substantial has actually happened. We just have some meetings and then a whole bunch of news articles after those meetings attempting to read meaning into those meetings. And I think we need to stop. I think we need to stop giving so much leeway to people who are richer than God, with more money, power, and influence than any of us will ever see in our lifetimes. I think we need to quit carrying water for them. I think that if Pope Leo actually cares and gives a shit, he can say so with his chest. We know he can talk. But he hasn't done that, has he? Weird. I'm suspicious, and I wish I wasn't. So, now that we have that article out of the way, I want to take you through some personal testimonies that have been published on the Spanish site Opus Libris. I just have 3 here. I know this video is getting a little bit longer, but I want to share some of these testimonies that people have been sharing on sites like Opus Libris and Opus Dei Exposed for, in Opus Libris' case, decades at this point, that add corroboration to the allegations that people are making about this organization. This article on Opus Libris was published November 8th, 2010. The title is "This is How Conscience is Violated in Opus Dei," and it was written by someone with the username La Rosa Blanca. Tyrants throughout history have tried to dominate others. They have always needed to resort to torture and physical violence to achieve this. Thanks to Escriva, founder of Opus Dei, a new method has been discovered that can reach the very depths of the conscience and subdue it without physical violence. This method uses 3 lethal weapons of mass destruction: the sacrament of reconciliation, misused of course, the fraternal chat or confidence, and fraternal correction. These are internal language jargon for people in Opus Dei. This fraternal chat is where you're supposed to tell someone every single thought and feeling and emotion that you have, and the fraternal correction is basically the system of tattletale control wherein the members within Opus Dei are prisoners and prison guards by reinforcing the same mechanisms of control on each other that are keeping them trapped. When these 3 are used masterfully together, they can subdue the other person without them even realizing it. Hitler and Stalin must be turning in their graves with envy. Well, and also, I do want to make the point that the systems of control that we see in Opus Dei, this is something that I have learned from my research, and you can read more about this over on my Substack in that series about APM in Opus Dei, that these methods of control that high control groups like Opus Dei use are not new or novel or never before seen. They've actually existed throughout human history, and you can find cases, situations, and stories that illustrate that fact pretty well all throughout recorded human history. Why? Because the methods to control and manipulate people, to manipulate human psychology and human emotion, are very well understood and researched at this point. I mean, it's probably worth really thinking about it. It's probably one of the oldest sciences on the planet, knowing how to manipulate and control people without them ever actually knowing that you are doing it. This is something that high control groups, organizations, institutions, and religions have been using since the dawn of time. And it's really useful to read, and this is why I'm always encouraging people to do more research, to read about other examples of this type of thing happening in other contexts, even non-religious contexts, because I think that can really open your eyes and illustrate how, like I said, the methods that are used to control people are very well established. Society, evildoers, they know what they are at this point. In Opus Dei, the ultimate secret for beginning to destroy people lies in collective spiritual direction. In fact, it is the Opus Dei institution itself that provides spiritual direction. Father Escriva and his successors delegate this task to directors, who in turn can delegate it to others, always lay people. There is no distinction between the internal and external forum. Every week, numeraries and associates who have a fraternal chat where with raw honesty they share their innermost thoughts. The victim has no choice. They are subjected to these conversations with whomever they are told. Those who receive the talk are not obligated to maintain secrecy. It is collective spiritual direction. They discuss people's private lives in the local council and prepare written reports of conscience. The victim is unaware that their private life is being manipulated and documented. Once they have reached the sanctuary of their conscience, they are told that God's will is revealed through the directors. They must obey or leave. This constitutes a genuine violation of conscience. Priests, too, must submit to weekly confessions with a layperson. Then, also on a weekly basis, the victims must confess to the priest at the center. They are told they are free to confess to whomever they wish, but in practice, they are forced to confess to the good shepherds, that is, the priests designated by the organization. The confession must be brief and concise. Once absolution has been administered, the subsequent conversation, even if it concerns matters discussed in confession, is free from the seal of confession and professional secrecy. This is a really huge deal, and if you are not Catholic and don't have any familiarization with Catholic religious sacraments, I can understand why that might not stand out to you, but I need to underscore how serious the accusation that Opus Dei is violating the confessional seal is, because the sacrament of confession, of reconciliation for the uninitiated, is basically where you go to a priest who is acting in persona Christi, or in the person of Christ, it's Latin, and basically being the intermediary to facilitate your come to God reconciliation. I'm sorry for the things that I've done type of thing. It's a very important part of Catholic doctrine and Catholic life and everything. And what is said when you are going to confession with a priest is supposed to be completely secret, unimpeachable, unassailable. You can't even call on priests to testify in legal court cases or anything against people for things that they said in the confessional booth. Priests can never be called upon to testify in that way, because everything that is said is supposed to be secret. And yet within Opus Dei, for quite some time now, this was published in 2010, and you can find older stories as well, and some more recent on places like Opus Dei Exposed. Opus Dei has taken that entire concept of the information that is conveyed to a person during confession and really run with it and used it to their own advantage in a way that is very non-canonical and not in accordance with church teaching in any way, shape, or form. This subterfuge is unprecedented in the history of the church. The priest guides the penitent with the spiritual instructions he receives from the directors, who are ultimately responsible for spiritual direction. This unacceptable practice was unknown to church authority until recently. Once the conscience has been subdued in its most intimate areas and the will of God manifested through the directors, the victim must suffer further humiliations. Conversations about personal matters with other members of the prelature are prohibited. Confession and the weekly fraternal chat are sufficient. Thus, the victim is isolated, atomized. Friendship and intimacy among members, especially with members of the opposite sex, are severed. They are burdened with rules. They have to follow so many that by the end of the day, there's no time to rest or think. They must report on their compliance weekly in the fraternal meeting, and it is recommended that they keep a daily log and note whether they have complied with them or not. just have to say that this degree of like self-surveillance is really, really not healthy. And while I am not a like mental health professional and do not have a degree in mental health, I've read a lot about mental health and have been through my fair share of therapy. And I know that hyperfixation on the like how perfectly you are doing something, how perfectly you are like living a life, it's not a recipe for success or happiness. It could actually create a situation where someone falls into something like religious scrupulosity, which is a type of OCD that is very, very harmful and can have very, very, very negative health outcomes for the individual if they are not treated like effectively. External behavior is controlled through so-called fraternal correction. Victims are encouraged to keep lists. I already read that. After obtaining permission from the appropriate authority, any member can correct another. This is this like internalized system of control. Victims are constantly encouraged. Everyone spies on everyone else. It's subtle and effective coercion. This practice causes immense suffering to its members. The individual is completely subjugated. In most cases, this treatment begins in adolescence, an age favored by Opus Dei for proselytizing. When they become ill, they are taken to psychiatrists affiliated with the organization, always accompanied, who prescribe pills to help them persevere in their vocation. The most serious cases are taken to the 4th floor of the hospital in Pamplona. Incredibly, all of this can be proven with secret documents from Opus Dei, unknown to the Church until recently, and by the testimony of thousands of victims. The Church faces the difficult task of confronting this pathology within Christianity and bringing public justice to the victims. So, published in 2010, this situation in Opus Dei is not a new one, although I am beginning to read some things, and I'll get into this in my next video, that the situation may be evolving internally, which is certainly a good thing, obviously. We do not need organizations like this completely overriding people's like bodily autonomy and medical autonomy in this way. Here's a little blurb. This was published even earlier than the last article in 2004, June 9th of 2004. Do you remember where you were then? I was really young. They said, I also went to an Opus Dei psychiatrist in Pamplona, and I was on medication for over 3 years. I wasn't admitted to the 4th floor. In my day, they didn't admit people to the 4th floor, but they got rid of me. You have no idea. I think God gave me a hand. I had to do my military service because I ran out of deferments. After my service, I went back to my parents' house. I got off of the pills on my own. I can tell you about it if it helps. Like you, many of us have felt alone, very alone, but the monster couldn't defeat us. And now we're here, alive, strong, joyful, and with the courage to look the monster in the eye and pierce its scales. I understand very well what you're feeling. I'm offering to help you get rid of the mud. You can overcome this with love, signed Little Ant. This is in response to someone named Angelus and their experience linked here. Guys, there are literally so many. I could sit and record for hours and hours and hours just reading testimonies, experiences from Opus Libris alone, talking about these like identical experiences that people have had. And I'm just like scratching the surface and sharing just a little bit with you in this video. There are so much more. And if you are doubting me, doubting the veracity of these people and the things that they are saying, please do your own research. You may come to different conclusions, I suppose. You don't have to agree with me or see my point of view or share my opinion. But I do hope that if you are watching this video and you're still here and you're really like mentally pushing back against the things that are being said, I'm convinced that it can't be true, I would ask that you please spend some time doing your own research and self-educating a little bit, because it's really, really important to remember that this is a vast organization with a presence all around the world and cultures all around the world. And so the variety of experiences that people can have in this organization truly are innumerable. And so the last article that I'll read just for today's video is another experience that someone published on Opus Libris and shared. The title is, There Are Also Little Pieces of My Life in the Chapel on the Pamplona campus. This was written by someone with the username Maripaz. I haven't checked the website for a few weeks because I've been busy with various things. When this happens, I usually take advantage of a quiet afternoon and read everything published in one sitting with great interest. Not surprisingly, this corner became my refuge shortly after leaving the construction site after having left it behind. 35 years of my life as an auxiliary numerary, and I have great affection for him. 25 years have passed since I left, and I am a new woman. Of course, there has been a long, painful, profound process to find myself, accept myself, rebuild myself, to get to the heart of being myself. I like to repeat when I tell some of my story within the play that my personal self was buried at ground level. I had been shamelessly manipulated for years. I became involved with the play when I was 16. When you've barely entered adolescence and are easily manipulated, malleable, and vulnerable to having whatever they want instilled in you, you have no resources to fight back. Thus, slowly, I found myself trapped in a bubble where I was made in his image and likeness. I've always been a passionate woman, and I still am at 75. It's a characteristic of my personality. I say this because my desire was to embrace everything they told me, which, according to them, was where goodness lay and what was worth giving one's life for. Until, with the arrival of maturity, that world you have inhabited for a long time begins to crack and fill with doubts when you observe the contradictions that what they say is one thing and what they do is another. My personal self, upon leaving the play, was reeling. I felt lost, alone, in an unfamiliar world. It's a process in which you gradually regain your freedom. Like a small child, you observe the real world with wonder. Your inner pain begins to subside. Your steps, uncertain yet free, begin to set the rhythm. Until one day, when you least expect it, your authentic self bursts forth from all its genuine beauty. It rises from the ground to the clouds. You recognize yourself. It is an explosion of light and joy because you've recovered the essence of your own being. All of this preamble is to thank this user, Robredal. I had a wonderful time reading your latest contribution about the story surrounding the Hermitage of Beautiful Love in Pamplona. I can see it from the bus on my way to the city center. I often go there in the autumn or spring to take some photographs or simply to stroll around the campus. I've even run into some residents I once cared for in Seville, now quite a few years older. They didn't recognize me, but I recognized them. I have a good eye for faces. Besides, I haven't forgotten that I was destined to be a mother to the numeraries, and I dedicated myself wholeheartedly to that endeavor. How naive I was. And I often see people crowded together in groups or alone accompanying the lady. Sometimes, when she's alone, I've dared to look at her closely. I broke ties with religion a long time ago, and I don't see any way to reconcile our positions, no matter how hard I try. There are also pieces of my story in that area. I spent many months hospitalized on the 4th floor of the university clinic, overdosed on pills, broken, sick, emotionally shattered. But that's all a part of my past now. I am a new woman, passionate, free, and full of life, trying to make up for lost time. I embrace each and every one of you from afar. This was published November 29th, 2023, so just within the last few years. And so I hope what I've been able to convey by sharing these articles today is the precedence for this issue, the fact that this is not something that is kind of new or fringe, not something that's simply coming out of one particular region, but is something that is disturbingly present in a large number of the testimonies that people have. I also hope that by sharing these testimonies with you, I can give you an appreciation of what the experiences for the people who went through this institution were actually like and the long-term impacts that that has left on them. These people, many of them, Maripaz being a perfect example in this last article, are trying to rebuild and live a life that was completely robbed from them, decades and decades of life that they will never get back. And they are trying to reconstruct that quite literally like in their 60s and 70s onward. And it's really, really evil, I think, and exploitative and wrong. And I believe that there's a better way. If people want to be involved in religious organizations, I know because there are examples of religious organizations that are not exploitative, that really do empower people to engage authentically and fully and to exercise informed consent in the decisions that they make. I know that that is something that is possible. And so it adds another layer of sadness to this entire thing for me, because all of this, all of these circumstances and situations that people have found themselves in, and the problem that this organization has created are and were all avoidable. And I would really, really love to move forward into a world where these types of harms cannot be perpetrated on people as easily. And I think that the two best things that we can do to begin moving in that direction is to share this information publicly so that people are aware, and to illuminate and uplift the stories and testimonies of people who have been through these experiences firsthand and have suffered for them, because recognition of the things that you have been through is an incredibly important part of the healing process for a victim survivor of any type of abuse. And we know that, sadly, because of the world that we live in, many victim survivors will never receive the acknowledgement of their pain and suffering that they deserve, will never be told that the things that happened to them were not their fault, not their responsibility, and that they did not deserve it to happen to them. And that is a tragedy, and I think something that we need to change, because the only way that we're going to move forward and hopefully create a world where these types of things cannot happen to people is if we are engaged and aware and educated and exercising a degree of compassion in how we handle these situations. I recognize that the situation with Opus Dei, as with other religious organizations or just organizations in general, is very, very complex and not straightforward. There is a lot of nuance in this entire thing. And so I try to illuminate some of that by having conversations and publishing videos like this. I try to create a little bit more awareness and a little bit more education, just in the hopes that going forward we can all have a little bit more informed consent and be a little bit more trauma informed as well, so that we can all help each other as we are moving through life. So thank you so much for sitting through this video with me. Again, all sources are linked down below in a source document. Please do not forget to give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already, and please consider subscribing. Like 78% or more of my viewers are not subscribed, and I would really like to shrink that number a little bit more, so please consider doing so if you haven't already. If you are listening someplace other than YouTube, a podcasting platform, what have you, please consider leaving a positive review or a kind comment. That really helps the Deep Dive Project to reach more people as well. Links to connect with me, learn more about my work, are all linked in the description below. And I will have a new video, probably the third and final part of this APM discussion, out very, very soon. But in the meantime, don't forget, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.